Greetings everyone, this is Julie Legg with Julie Legg Photography. It is fall here in Kansas City, and I apologize if I sound stuffy or sniffle a bit, but the ragweed in Kansas City is getting a bit to me, so I'm a little bit stuffed up today. But I recently went on a photo safari trip with a friend of mine, and we drove north up to Weston, north of Kansas City, and photographed the fall leaves, which I'm going to put those photos on my blog. And right here was some leaves I collected while on my trip and around my house as well, and I chose my favorite ones and I created a still life using the jean jacket as a background, and the wood in the background is actually a vinyl background. It's a photograph piece of wood that they printed onto a vinyl. I get my backgrounds at bubblegumbackdrops.com. They have an amazing assortment, whether you're a portrait photographer or still life. I really like them. So what I want to do today is just show you how I go about my photography, my still life. On the bottom here you can see all these thumbnails. Those are different photos I took. I had the basic idea of putting the leaves in a pocket of my jean jacket. I like the idea of the blue with the yellow, and if I could have I didn't find any red leaves, so I got the greenish yellow leaves here in Kansas City. I did find one red leaf. That was on my trip to Weston. I brought that one home. And so I just took my photograph in different kinds of light. I don't like that light. It's too harsh. But I mean, I could play with it, but I like soft light. I can't get away from that. I like it. But I took something in a lighting that I don't usually like to use because you never know, and I might play with it later. And I have you can see at the top left here, the f-stop is 1.8. That's on my 50mm lens at a 400th of a second at ISO 320. So I was hand holding it and opened it all the way because it was soft light. It was filtered light. There were some clouds out today, and that's the best I could do. I didn't want to go higher than 400 on my camera. It's a Canon 60D, and if I go too much higher than 400 ISO, it can get grainy, and that's just how my camera is. It's kind of a semi-pro, the Canon 60D. It's not a full-blown pro, but it works for me. And I like the 1.8. I like the softness, things blurring out. So, and there's 2.8. That's a little bit dark, but it's still usable. If you look at the histogram, I'm going to give you a little short histogram here. This could be your best friend, the histogram, whether you're in Lightroom, Photoshop, or if you're photographing. It's something I started doing lately is I photograph, and I have my camera set so I can see the histogram. It comes up after I take a photo. And on the left side of your histogram, at the top left here, is your shadows, your darks. And to the right of your histogram is your lights, your highlights. And everything in the middle is your midtones. And if you have a photograph, let's see if this one shows it more. You see the histogram moved to the left because there's more shadows in this picture and they're darker. And when your shadows hit all the way to the left, that means they're clipping. And clipping simply means your camera doesn't have any detail in those areas. It's probably right in here, and in here you can see there's just no detail. But it's not too bad. And the same thing if it's all the way to the right, then that means you're clipping your highlights. You can see this one, it's not clipped. zoom in a little, you can see there is detail in there, and it's just to the, not quite all the way to the edge, and that's what you want there. And once again, just a reminder, I always photograph in RAW for this reason, because this information has been gathered by my camera, and I can RAW gives me more leeway. I can pull that down if I want to and have even more detail showing. If you shoot in JPEG, it's not, your camera's not collecting as much information. It's a more narrow area, let's call it, of information without getting too technical. And so it's in your highlights and shadows, if your exposure's not right on, you will be clipping your highlights and shadows. And even if your exposure is right on, your blacks and your whites, they just don't have as much detail as you do when you shoot RAW. And of course, when you photograph in RAW, I mean, everything here looks kind of bad. You're like, what happened to the color? It looked great when I looked at the back of my camera. But that's because by shooting in RAW, I am collecting all the information, and the camera is not processing the information. When you photograph in JPEG, your camera automatically processes all this information here in this right-hand panel. Your camera processes the contrast, the highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, and vibrant saturation, and it chooses automatically what it thinks it should be. And so that's shooting in RAW and JPEG. But that's enough of that. So the histogram, I like the picture with the red leaf. And if you look at the histogram, the blacks are not clipped and the whites are definitely not clipped. And you look at this one, you see that the histogram has moved over to the right. And the rule of thumb is you want to photograph to the right as opposed to here, see, to the left. And the reason is when you try to correct for your shadows by opening up your exposure, and this is not an extreme example, but certainly in more extreme examples, you lose the quality. If you were to zoom in, you would see a more, this is not the best example, but you would see a more destructive in the noise, and you would see a lot of grain and a lot of more noise in your shadows and in your image when you photograph too far to the left. Excuse me. So I'm going to choose this picture because it's right on. It's right in the middle. I have most of my information in the middle. There's nothing in here that's, you know, if you have a white background, then this probably would have an area over here that would be all white, and that's okay because white is white. You still wouldn't want it clipped all the way over, but it would be closer excuse me again, if this background was all white. But since it's not, all the information's in the middle, and that tells you have a good exposure. So when you're out in the field, you want the most important information to be in the middle, or overexpose if you must, but don't ever underexpose, because you're going to you're just not going to be able to bring back the detail in those shadows, and it's going to be grainy and yucky. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is, I shot this in next to my window. It's an eastern facing window, and the sun was not directly shining through it because it's fall and the sun is further over. So I got soft light, and I'm going to play with my color temperature. Actually, I like cloudy because it's bringing out a little more color. I'm going to leave the tint alone. And I'm going to pull down my highlights just a little bit. Don't need too much. There's nothing super white in here except back there. Shadows, you look at your shadows in here, and I might bring it up a little, but not too much. And this is how you set your white point so that you get all the information you can and your black point. First we'll do the white point. You right or left click onto this little knob here, and you, on a Mac, you hold the Option. Here, let me get rid of this. Command I gets rid of that title at the top left. So Option, left click, and you pull it to the right until you see those little dots. Those dots mean that that's the brightest area of your photograph, and you're blowing it out. You're clipping your highlights. So we just pull it back till we don't see anymore, and that's your white point. And then you can do the same for the black, and you go in the opposite direction, but you do want to see a few, and then a few of the little pixels. But then I just eye it myself and play with it till I get it where I want it. And then for still life, not for portraiture, I would pull up my clarity just to where I like it. And then maybe add a little contrast. And I play with vibrance, and I leave saturation alone for the most part for still life. And then I go into, well, before I do detail, I can show you the HSL. You can go into luminance, and you can pick a color like yellow and watch the leaves, and you can see it kind of changes the density. And sometimes that's kind of neat to kind of make them pop a little more. I'm going to be real subtle on this. And then we have red. I might want to pull that down just a tad. And then I'm going to go into saturation, and if you do want to saturate or desaturate something, you can do it by color here. Like if I wanted to desaturate the jacket, which I don't, I think that looks really awful. And I could put it up just a little, but you really need to be careful with saturation. It can just look overdone. But I'm going to leave that alone. And I do want to see, see, if I pull this over, I can darken my oranges a little, my background, but it is affecting the leaf as well. And I don't want to do that, but right about there's not too bad. But I can darken the background in other ways. So I'm going to leave that alone. Then I go to detail, and if you zoom in, you can see some noise, which is normal. But sometimes noise can be really bad and you don't want it. You can really see it in flat areas. But my rule of thumb is if there's not much noise, go to 20. And then sharpening, 20 from 100 is 80. And so I might take it up to 80 for still life. And then you, again, push down the Option button, left click on masking, and pull it to the right. And whatever is white, or rather black, that is not being sharpened. So it's just sharpening the outline and the texture. And I like it right about there. That looks good. And that's all I do there. Lens corrections, always click that, and always click remove chromatic aberration. And if I'm photographing something like a tree or a leaf, leaves on a tree or windows, those areas, they always seem to get that chromatic aberration, and it's the purple or the green outline you'll see in those areas. And it's just light refracting through your lens. It happens all the time. And especially if you're putting a filter over your camera, like a polarizer or something, that will happen, and so you've got to take that out. And effects is where you can put on vignetting, and I will do that, but not right now. So next, I'm not going to crop it or anything just yet. I am going to take it into Photoshop next and play with it there. But as I'm looking at this, it's very contrasty, and I'm not liking, I don't think I like the clarity so much. I'm taking that down, leaving the contrast at 10. You can take clarity to the opposite, but that looks weird. Maybe just put on 8. I'm going to go with that. Okay, so I'll see you in Lightroom next, or in Photoshop next, sorry.